The 6-month trial period proved to be the most challenging time of Margaret Thompson's life. She found herself traveling constantly between Fort Benning in Georgia, Camp Pendleton in California, and Fort Bragg in North Carolina, working 18-hour days to train instructors and implement the Thompson method at 3 very different military installations. Each base presented unique challenges that tested the flexibility and universality of Margaret's approach. Fort Benning was training raw recruits with no previous shooting experience. Camp Pendleton was working with experienced Marines who had developed bad habits over years of service. Fort Bragg was preparing elite soldiers for special operations missions, where marksmanship could mean the difference between life and death. At Fort Benning, Margaret discovered that her methods worked even better with complete beginners than with experienced soldiers who had to unlearn previous training. Young recruits who had never held a rifle before seemed to naturally embrace the relaxed, instinctive approach she advocated. Within weeks, these new soldiers were outperforming veterans who had been shooting for years. Master Sergeant Jim Collins, the head marksmanship instructor at Fort Benning, was initially skeptical of training recruits without the rigid discipline that had been standard for decades. "Ma'am," he told Margaret during her first week at the base, "these boys need structure and discipline. If we let them get too relaxed, they'll lose the military bearing that keeps them alive in combat." Margaret understood his concern, but she had learned to address this issue during her time at Camp Perry. Sergeant Collins, discipline and relaxation aren't opposites. A disciplined soldier is one who can perform effectively under pressure. If we teach these men to shoot well when they're calm and confident, they'll be much more likely to shoot well when they're scared and under fire. To prove her point, Margaret arranged a special exercise. Half of the recruits were trained using traditional methods with constant emphasis on following exact procedures and maintaining rigid posture. The other half were trained using the Thompson method, with emphasis on natural movement and instinctive shooting. After 4 weeks of training, both groups were subjected to a stress test designed to simulate combat conditions. The recruits were required to shoot while physical trainers shouted at them, while firecrackers exploded nearby, and while they were physically exhausted from running obstacle courses. The results were conclusive. The soldiers, trained with the Thompson method, maintained much higher accuracy under stress than those trained with traditional methods. "I don't understand it," Sergeant Collins admitted to Margaret. "Everything I was taught says that rigid discipline should produce better results under pressure." "Sergeant," Margaret replied, "rigid training produces rigid soldiers. But combat isn't rigid. Combat is chaotic and unpredictable. Soldiers who have learned to trust their instincts and adapt to changing conditions will always outperform soldiers who can only follow memorized procedures." At Camp Pendleton, Margaret faced a different challenge. The Marines there were experienced marksmen who had developed their own individual techniques over years of service. Many were resistant to changing methods that had worked for them in the past. Gunnery Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the Sergeant Rodriguez from Camp Perry, was particularly difficult to convince. She was a decorated veteran who had served in combat and had strong opinions about what worked and what didn't. "Mrs. Thompson," Gunny Rodriguez said bluntly, "I've been shooting since before you started thinking about marksmanship training. My Marines hit their targets because they're disciplined and they follow proven techniques. I don't see why we need to fix something that isn't broken." Margaret realized that she needed a different approach with experienced shooters. Instead of trying to replace their existing skills, she focused on helping them optimize what they already knew. She showed them how small adjustments in their mental approach could improve their already excellent shooting. The breakthrough came when Margaret worked with Corporal Jennifer Walsh, a sniper who was considered one of the best shots in her unit, but was struggling with consistency. Some days Walsh could hit targets at impossible distances. Other days she missed shots that should have been routine. "Corporal," Margaret said after observing Walsh's shooting for several sessions, "you have excellent technique, but I notice that your performance varies based on your mood and stress level. What if we could find a way to help you access your best shooting state more consistently?" Margaret guided Walsh through exercises designed to help her recognize the mental and physical sensations associated with her best shooting performances. She taught Walsh how to recreate those optimal states deliberately, rather than waiting for them to occur naturally. The results were dramatic. Walsh's shooting became not just more accurate but more consistent. More importantly, other Marines began to take notice. If the Thompson method could make their best shooter even better, maybe there was something to it after all. At Fort Bragg, Margaret faced her ultimate test. The special operations soldiers there were the elite of the elite, men who would be conducting the most dangerous and demanding missions the military had to offer. They needed to be able to shoot accurately under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Colonel Robert Harrison, the commanding officer of the Special Operations Training Unit, was a no-nonsense professional who had little patience for unproven methods. "Mrs. Thompson," he said during their first meeting, "my men's lives depend on their marksmanship skills. I can't afford to experiment with their training unless I'm absolutely certain your methods will make them more effective, not less." Margaret understood the stakes. These soldiers would be operating behind enemy lines, often in situations where a single missed shot could compromise an entire mission and endanger American lives. They needed to be perfect marksmen, capable of hitting their targets under any conditions. The Special Operations soldiers presented unique challenges. They were already excellent marksmen. They were used to operating under extreme stress, and they were naturally skeptical of anything that seemed to make their training easier rather than harder. Captain Mike Stevens, a veteran of multiple special operations missions, expressed the sentiment of many of his fellow soldiers. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we're used to training being hard. Making things easier makes us soft, and soft soldiers get killed in the field." Margaret realized that she needed to reframe her approach for this audience. "Captain, I'm not trying to make your training easier. I'm trying to make it more effective. The goal isn't to reduce the challenge. It's to help you perform better under that challenge." She began working with small groups of special operations soldiers, focusing on advanced applications of the Thompson method. Instead of basic relaxation techniques, she taught them how to achieve optimal shooting states while under extreme physical and psychological stress. Instead of simple confidence-building exercises, she helped them develop unshakable mental focus that could be maintained even in life-or-death situations. The training was intense and demanding, but it produced remarkable results. Soldiers who were already shooting at the 95th percentile began consistently performing at the 99th percentile or higher. More importantly, their shooting remained consistently excellent, even when they were physically exhausted, emotionally stressed, or operating under combat simulations that would have degraded the performance of traditionally trained marksmen. Word of the success at all three installations began to spread throughout the military establishment. Reports came back to the Pentagon showing dramatic improvements in marksmanship scores, reduced training time requirements, and higher soldier satisfaction with their shooting abilities. But perhaps the most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. Veterans of recent combat operations began reporting that soldiers trained with the Thompson method were performing significantly better in actual firefights than soldiers trained with traditional methods. The new training wasn't just producing better range scores, it was saving lives in real combat situations. As the 6-month trial period drew to a close, Margaret found herself summoned back to the Pentagon for a final evaluation. General Blackwood and a panel of senior military officers would review all the data from the 3 test installations and decide whether the Thompson method would be adopted, military-wide or quietly abandoned. Margaret knew that this meeting would determine not just the future of her training methods, but possibly the fate of thousands of American soldiers who would depend on their marksmanship skills in future conflicts. Everything she had worked for over the past months would be decided in a single presentation to men who had the power to transform military training or dismiss her efforts as an interesting but impractical experiment. The Pentagon briefing room was more intimidating than anything Margaret Thompson had ever faced. Sitting across from her were 12 of the most senior officers in the United States military, men whose decisions affected the lives of millions of soldiers around the world. General Blackwood sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the thick folders of data that had been compiled from the 6-month trial. Margaret wore her best dress, the same navy blue one she had worn to church for the past 5 years, and carried the worn leather briefcase that Robert had given her for Christmas. She felt completely out of place in this room of power and authority, but she also felt a quiet confidence in what she had accomplished. "Mrs. Thompson," General Blackwood began, "we've reviewed the data from all 3 test installations, And I have to say the results are quite remarkable. Marksmanship scores improved by an average of 42% across all units. Training time was reduced by 30%. And perhaps most importantly, soldier satisfaction and confidence increased dramatically. He paused and looked directly at Margaret. But numbers only tell part of the story. What we really need to understand is whether these improvements will translate into better performance in actual combat situations. Colonel Harrison from Fort Bragg leaned forward. General, I can speak to that question. We had an opportunity to test soldiers trained with the Thompson method during a recent classified operation in Southeast Asia. Without going into details I can't discuss, I can say that their marksmanship performance under extreme combat stress exceeded anything we had seen from traditionally trained soldiers. General Blackwood nodded. That's encouraging, but I want to hear from Mrs. Thompson herself. Can you explain in simple terms why your methods work when traditional training has failed? Margaret took a deep breath. General, the military has always understood that soldiers need to be physically prepared for combat. You train them to be strong, fast, and tough. But somehow, when it comes to marksmanship, the military forgot that mental preparation is just as important as physical preparation. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Traditional marksmanship training focuses entirely on technique, stance, grip, sight alignment, trigger control. These are all important, but they're just tools. The question is, who's using the tools? A relaxed, confident soldier who trusts his instincts, or a tense, overthinking soldier who's afraid of making a mistake? Margaret drew a simple diagram showing two soldiers. When we train soldiers using traditional methods, we're essentially teaching them to override their natural abilities with memorized procedures. We're turning them into shooting robots instead of skilled marksmen. But surely discipline and standardized procedures are important in military training, interjected General Patricia Williams, the highest-ranking woman in the room. Absolutely, Margaret agreed. But there's a difference between disciplined training and rigid training. The Thompson method maintains military discipline while allowing natural shooting ability to flourish. We're not making training easier. We're making it more effective. General Blackwood studied the data in front of him. Mrs. Thompson, implementing your methods across the entire military would require retraining thousands of instructors and revising decades of established doctrine. That's an enormous undertaking. How do we know it will work consistently across different units and different types of soldiers? Margaret returned to her seat. General, that's exactly what we tested over the past 6 months. The method worked with raw recruits at Fort Benning, experienced Marines at Camp Pendleton, and elite Special Operations soldiers at Fort Bragg. It worked with soldiers from different backgrounds, different skill levels, and different military specialties. But what about instructors? Asked Major General Robert Chen. Not every marksmanship instructor has your intuitive understanding of shooting psychology. How do we ensure consistent implementation? Margaret smiled. General, that was the hardest part of this entire project. But we solved it by creating a systematic training program for instructors. We identified the most common problems that interfere with good shooting, and we gave instructors specific tools for addressing each problem. An instructor doesn't need to be a psychologist. They just need to recognize patterns and know which techniques to apply. Colonel Mitchell, who had been quietly observing the meeting, spoke up. Generals, I've worked with Mrs. Thompson from the beginning of this project. I can tell you that her training program for instructors is thorough and effective. We've already trained over 50 instructors at Camp Perry, and they're achieving results that match what Mrs. Thompson accomplished personally. General Blackwood looked around the table at his fellow officers. Are there any other concerns or questions about implementing the Thompson method? General Williams raised her hand. I have one concern. This approach seems to rely heavily on individual adaptation and personal attention. How do we maintain that quality when we scale up to train hundreds of thousands of soldiers? Margaret had anticipated this question. General, that's where the instructor training becomes crucial. We teach instructors to recognize individual differences and adapt their methods accordingly. It's not about giving every soldier identical training. It's about giving every soldier the type of training that works best for them. And the cost? Asked General Blackwood. Actually lower than traditional training, Margaret replied. Because soldiers learn faster and retain their skills longer. We need fewer training hours to achieve better results. The initial investment in instructor retraining pays for itself within the first year. The room fell silent as the generals considered everything they had heard. Margaret could feel her heart beating as she waited for their decision. Everything she had worked for, everything that could benefit American soldiers for generations to come, depended on what these men decided in the next few minutes. Finally, General Blackwood spoke. "Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the United States military, I want to thank you for your service to our country. What you've accomplished is nothing short of revolutionary." He paused, and Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "We've decided to implement the Thompson method as the standard marksmanship training protocol for all branches of the military. Effective immediately." The room erupted in a mixture of applause and excited discussion. Margaret felt tears welling up in her eyes as the magnitude of the decision hit her. Her quiet insights from a farm in Ohio were about to become the foundation of military training for the most powerful armed forces in the world. "Mrs. Thompson," General Blackwood continued, "we'd like to offer you a position as Special Advisor for Marksmanship Training, reporting directly to the Pentagon. Your job would be to oversee the implementation of your methods and continue developing improvements to military training." Margaret was overwhelmed by the offer, but she knew her answer immediately. "General, I'm honored by your offer, but I think my job here is done. You have excellent instructors who understand the Thompson method better than I do now. What you need going forward isn't an advisor. It's leadership that believes in the approach and gives instructors the support they need to implement it properly." She stood up and gathered her papers. "I'm just a farm wife from Ohio who happened to understand something about shooting. The real heroes are the instructors and soldiers who trusted me enough to try something different. They're the ones who deserve the credit for what we've accomplished." As Margaret left the Pentagon that day, she knew that her life would never be the same, but she also knew that thousands of American soldiers would be better prepared for the challenges they would face. And that was all that really mattered to her. 6 months later, reports began coming in from combat zones around the world. American soldiers were outperforming enemy marksmen by margins that military leaders had never seen before. The Thompson method had not only solved the marksmanship crisis, it had given American forces a significant tactical advantage. Margaret Thompson returned to her quiet life in Ohio, tending her garden and helping Robert with the dairy farm. But she never forgot the soldiers she had trained, and they never forgot the unassuming woman who had taught them to trust themselves and shoot with confidence. The military's marksmanship scores remained at record highs for decades, and the Thompson method became the foundation for training programs that saved countless lives in conflicts around the world. Sometimes the most revolutionary changes come not from experts or officials, but from ordinary people who see problems clearly and have the courage to speak up. Margaret Thompson proved that wisdom doesn't always come from expected sources, and that the right insight at the right time can change the course of history. Sarah spent the next week trying to track down anyone who could verify her service. She reached out to the few contacts she still had from her time in the Navy, but most had moved on to civilian careers and had no access to classified information. The ones who did remember her could only confirm that she had served, not the specific details of her assignments. Her apartment became a command center of sorts, with papers spread across her kitchen table, phone numbers scribbled on sticky notes, and a growing list of dead ends. Every call seemed to lead to another automated system or a secretary who couldn't help without proper authorization. On Tuesday morning, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Lieutenant Commander Davis from the Navy Personnel Command. I understand you've been trying to verify some aspects of your service record." Sarah's heart jumped. "Yes, sir. I'm having some issues with the VA accepting my documentation. I've received several inquiries about your case through unofficial channels. Can you tell me what specific problems you're encountering?" Sarah explained the situation, from Henderson's initial accusations to Rodriguez's investigation. Commander Davis listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or details. "Ms. Mitchell, I want to be upfront with you. I can't discuss classified programs over the phone, and I can't provide verification for missions that remain sensitive. However, I can tell you that your service record shows an honorable discharge and that you received several commendations during your time with us." "Sir, that's helpful, but the VA investigators say that's not enough. They need specific verification of the program I was part of." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Mitchell, have you considered reaching out to any private veterans advocacy groups? Sometimes they have resources or connections that can help in situations like this." It wasn't the answer Sarah had hoped for, but it was something. After thanking the commander, she began researching veterans advocacy organizations. Most seemed to focus on traditional benefit claims, but she eventually found one that specialized in cases involving classified operations. The organization was called the Special Operations Veterans Network, and their website indicated they helped veterans whose service couldn't be easily verified through normal channels. Sarah called their number and was surprised when a human being answered on the second ring. "Sovn, this is Marcus. Hi, I was hoping you could help me with a situation I'm having with the VA. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm being accused of fraudulent benefit claims because they can't verify my service with a special operations unit." "Sarah Mitchell?" Marcus repeated her name slowly. "Give me your service dates and unit designation." Sarah provided the information, and she could hear Marcus typing on a keyboard. "Interesting. I'm showing some flags in our database. Can you hold for just a moment?" Sarah waited for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to transfer you to our senior advocate. He might be able to help you more than I can." The line clicked and another voice came on. This one was older, gruffer, with the unmistakable tone of someone who had spent decades in the military. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Jake Patterson. I'm a retired Master Chief and I run the advocacy department here. I understand you're having some issues with benefit verification." Sarah went through her story again, but Patterson seemed to be listening with a different level of attention than anyone else had shown. "The tattoo you mentioned, can you describe it in detail?" Sarah described the compass rose design, including the specific modifications that made it unique to her unit. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to ask you to do something that might seem strange. I want you to take a high-resolution photo of that tattoo and email it to me. Can you do that right now?" "Of course, but can I ask why?" "I can't get into details over the phone, but let's just say that certain symbols have very specific meanings in the special operations community. If your tattoo is what I think it might be, then we might have some options for helping you." Sarah took several photos of her tattoo from different angles and emailed them immediately. Less than 5 minutes later, her phone rang again. "Ms. Mitchell, I need you to come to our offices tomorrow morning. Can you be in Virginia Beach by 10 a.m.? "I can, but good, don't bring any documentation with you. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Just come to the address I'm about to give you and ask for me specifically." The urgency in Patterson's voice was unmistakable. Sarah wrote down the address and confirmed the appointment. But Patterson had already hung up. The drive to Virginia Beach the next morning took 3 hours, and Sarah spent most of it wondering what she had gotten herself into. The address Patterson had given her led to a nondescript office building in an industrial area. There was no sign indicating what businesses were inside. The lobby was small and sparse, with just a reception desk and a few chairs. The young woman behind the desk looked up when Sarah entered. "Sarah Mitchell for Jake Patterson?"
"He's expecting you."
"Second floor, office 201. Sarah climbed the stairs and found herself in a hallway lined with offices. Most had frosted glass doors with no names or titles visible. Office 201 was at the end of the hall, and Sarah knocked softly. "Come in." Patterson was not what Sarah had expected. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and a full beard, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't hide his military bearing. But what struck her most were his eyes. They had the look of someone who had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. "Ms. Mitchell, have a seat. Before we go any further, I need to ask you some questions that might seem personal or strange. I need you to answer honestly, even if you don't understand why I'm asking." Sarah nodded. "During your time with NS Dollars, did you ever work with a handler who went by the call sign Compass?" Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. That information wasn't in any of her official documentation. "Yes, sir." "And during your final mission, the one where you were injured, were you operating in a location that officially doesn't exist on any map?" "Yes, sir." Patterson leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "Ms. Mitchell, your tattoo is authentic. The design includes elements that are known only to a very small group of people, and the placement is correct for your unit designation." "How do you know that?" "Because I helped design the program you were part of. I was the senior enlisted advisor when they were developing the integration protocols for female operators in special missions." Sarah felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You can verify my service? I can do more than that. I can connect you with people who have the authority to not only verify your service, but to ensure that you receive the benefits you've earned. But first I need to know, are you prepared for what comes next?" What do you mean? Patterson's expression became serious. Ms. Mitchell, once we start this process, there's no going back. Your case is going to attract attention from people at very high levels. Some of them are going to want to help you, but others might see you as a security risk or a problem that needs to be contained. Sarah thought about everything she had been through in the past week. The accusations, the humiliation, the feeling that everything she had sacrificed for meant nothing. Mr. Patterson, I just want the truth to come out. I served my country honorably, and I deserve to be treated with the respect that any veteran should receive. Patterson smiled for the first time since she had arrived. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Ms. Mitchell, we're going to get you the help you need, but it's going to require going through some very powerful people who don't like their programs being questioned. As Patterson reached for his phone to make the first call, Sarah realized that her ordeal was about to take a very different turn. For better or worse, she was about to find out just how far the military was willing to go to protect its secrets and its people. Patterson made his first call while Sarah sat across from him, trying to process everything that was happening. She could only hear his side of the conversation, but it was clear he was speaking to someone with significant authority. Sir, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Yes, sir, the Compass Rose program. I'm looking at one right now. No, sir, she's legitimate. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, with Patterson mostly listening and occasionally providing details about Sarah's case. When he finally hung up, his expression was unreadable. Ms. Mitchell, things are about to move very quickly. I've just spoken with someone at the Pentagon who has been waiting for a case like yours to surface. What do you mean? Your program was shut down abruptly in 2022 due to political pressure. Several participants were reassigned to different units, and their records were, let's say, sanitized to protect the program's existence. The people who ran the program have been concerned that veterans like you would eventually need benefits and wouldn't be able to prove their service. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anger. So they knew this would happen? They knew it was possible, but they also knew that acknowledging the program's existence could create national security issues. Female integration into special operations is still a politically sensitive topic. Patterson's phone rang again. He answered it immediately, listened for a moment, then looked at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, I need you to stay here for the rest of the day. There are people coming to speak with you, and some of them are traveling from significant distances. Over the next few hours, Sarah found herself in a surreal situation. Patterson's office became a meeting point for people she had never expected to see again. First to arrive was Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the psychologist who had evaluated her during the program. Sarah remembered her as being tough but fair, someone who truly understood the psychological challenges of integrating women into male-dominated special operations units. Sarah, Dr. Walsh said warmly, I heard about your situation. I want you to know that your psychological evaluations and performance reviews from the program are all documented and available to support your case. Dr. Walsh, I thought all that information was classified. It is. But there are procedures for declassifying information when it's needed to support a veteran's legitimate benefit claims. The problem is that most VA employees don't know these procedures exist. The next person to arrive surprised Sarah even more. Command Master Chief Rodriguez. Not the VA investigator, but a woman who had been one of Sarah's instructors during the program. She looked exactly the same as she had 4 years ago, still carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had made her such an effective teacher. Mitchell, she said with a slight smile, I heard you were having some trouble with paper pushers. Master Chief, I can't believe you're here. Believe it. When Patterson called our network, word got around quickly. Nobody who went through our program should have to deal with fraud accusations. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Some Sarah recognized from her time in the service. Others were complete strangers who had apparently been involved in the program at levels above her clearance. All of them seemed to share a common goal, ensuring that her service was properly recognized. Around 4 o'clock, Patterson received another phone call that seemed different from the others. His tone became more formal, and Sarah heard him say, Yes, sir, several times. Ms. Mitchell, he said after hanging up, there's someone else coming to speak with you today. Someone who has the authority to resolve this entire situation. Who? General Morrison. He was the flag officer who approved the Compass Rose program. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had never met General Morrison during her service, but she knew who he was. Flag officers didn't typically get involved in individual benefit cases unless something very significant was at stake. Is he coming here to help me or to shut me up? Patterson smiled grimly. With General Morrison, you never know until he gets here. But I will say this. He's a man who believes in taking care of his people. The general arrived at 6 o'clock, accompanied by 2 aides and a security detail that made it clear this was not a casual visit. Sarah had been in the military long enough to recognize real authority when she saw it, and General Morrison definitely had it. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades making life and death decisions. When he walked into Patterson's office, everyone stood at attention automatically. At ease, he said quietly. Ms. Mitchell, I understand you've been having some difficulties with the VA. Yes. Sir? General Morrison sat down across from her and pulled out a folder that she recognized. It contained copies of all her documentation. I've reviewed your case, and I want to apologize on behalf of the Department of Defense for the situation you found yourself in. When we shut down the Compass Rose program, we made provisions for protecting the participants' service records, but apparently those provisions weren't sufficient. Sarah felt a wave of relief, but she tried to keep her composure. Sir, I just want to receive the benefits I've earned. Ms. Mitchell, you're going to receive those benefits. But more importantly, we're going to ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to any other veterans from classified programs. The general opened her folder and pulled out a document that Sarah had never seen before. It looked official, with multiple signatures and seals. This is a letter of verification signed by myself and the Secretary of Defense. It confirms your participation in the Compass Rose program and validates all of your benefit claims. More importantly, it instructs the VA to expedite your case and provide you with full retroactive benefits. Sarah stared at the document, hardly believing what she was seeing. Sir, why are you doing this for me? General Morrison's expression became serious. Ms. Mitchell, you volunteered for one of the most dangerous and important programs in modern military history. You served with distinction in situations that most people can't even imagine. You were wounded in service to your country, and you've conducted yourself with honor throughout this entire ordeal. He stood up and extended his hand to her. It's not what I'm doing for you, Ms. Mitchell, it's what you've already done for all of us. As Sarah shook the general's hand, she realized that her nightmare was finally over. But more than that, she understood that her case was going to change things for other veterans in similar situations. Patterson spoke up. General, what about the other Compass Rose veterans? We're conducting a complete review of all program participants to ensure they have the documentation they need. Ms. Mitchell's case has shown us that our security measures inadvertently created problems for the very people we were trying to protect. As the meeting broke up and people began to leave, Dr. Walsh approached Sarah one more time. Sarah, I want you to know that your courage in fighting this case is going to help a lot of other veterans. You could have given up when they accused you of fraud, but you didn't. Dr. Walsh, I couldn't give up. Too many people sacrificed too much for me to just walk away when things got difficult. As Sarah finally left Patterson's office that evening, she carried with her not just the documentation that would restore her benefits, but also the knowledge that her service, all of it, had finally been acknowledged and honored by the people who mattered most. The fight was over, but she knew that the real work of helping other veterans in similar situations was just beginning. The next morning, Sarah drove back to the VA office with General Morrison's letter tucked safely in her folder. She had called ahead and specifically requested a meeting with Agent Rodriguez, who had agreed to see her immediately upon learning that new evidence had surfaced in her case. Rodriguez was waiting for her in the same conference room where Sarah had been questioned just 2 weeks earlier. The investigator's expression was professional, but Sarah could see curiosity in her eyes as she reviewed the documentation that Sarah placed on the table. Ms. Mitchell, this letter appears to be authentic, but I'll need to verify it through official channels before I can close your case. I understand, Agent Rodriguez. General Morrison told me that someone from his office would be contacting you directly to confirm everything. Rodriguez picked up the letter and examined it closely. The official seals and signatures were impressive, but what seemed to catch her attention most was the level of detail included in the verification. This document provides information about your service that wasn't in any of your original paperwork. Specific mission dates, medical treatment records, even details about your psychological evaluations during the program. Yes, ma'am. It turns out that all of that information was classified and stored separately from my regular service record. The people I served with had to go through special procedures to have it declassified for my benefit case. Rodriguez set the letter down and looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. When I first reviewed your case, the claim seemed so unusual that fraud appeared to be the most likely explanation. I've seen so many fake cases over the years that I may have been too quick to assume the worst. Agent Rodriguez, I don't blame you for being skeptical. My service was unusual and I understand why it raised red flags. Still, I should have been more thorough in my investigation before jumping to conclusions. Rodriguez made some notes in Sarah's file. I'm going to expedite the verification process and ensure that your benefits are processed immediately. You should expect full retroactive payments within 30 days. As Sarah prepared to leave, Rodriguez stood up and extended her hand. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your service, and thank you for not giving up when things looked hopeless. Your persistence has taught me to be more careful about cases involving classified programs. Sarah's next stop was Henderson's office. She had specifically requested to speak with him personally. Despite Patterson's advice that it wasn't necessary, she felt that she needed to face the man who had initially accused her of fraud. Henderson looked uncomfortable when she entered his office. Word had clearly gotten around about the resolution of her case, and he seemed to know why she was there. Ms. Mitchell, he said quietly, I've been informed that your documentation has been verified through official channels. I want to apologize for the way I handled your initial interview. Mr. Henderson, I understand that you were doing your job, but I hope that my case will help you approach similar situations differently in the future. Henderson nodded, but Sarah could see that he was struggling with something. Finally, he spoke up. Ms. Mitchell, can I ask you something? The tattoo that Agent Rodriguez mentioned in her report. Is that really how you proved your service? Sarah pushed up her sleeve and showed him the Compass Rose design. This tattoo is unique to the people who completed the Compass Rose program. It's not something you could get at any regular tattoo shop. The design includes specific elements that only people in our unit would recognize. Henderson examined the tattoo carefully. I have to admit, I've never seen anything like this before. The detail is incredible. Mr. Henderson, every element of this design has meaning. The compass points represent different aspects of our training. The small symbols around the edge indicate specific qualifications. Even the shading technique is unique to the military artist who created the design. Henderson sat back in his chair, looking thoughtful. Ms. Mitchell, in 20 years of working with veterans, I've learned to spot fake documentation, forged papers, even counterfeit medals. But this, he gestured toward her tattoo, this is something I never would have thought to look for. That's exactly why it works as verification. Most people don't even notice it, and those who do just think it's a regular tattoo. But to the right people, it's like showing a diploma from a university that doesn't officially exist. Henderson opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook. Would you mind if I made some notes about this? I want to make sure that if another veteran comes in with similar claims, I'll know what to look for. Sarah was surprised by his request, but she appreciated his willingness to learn. Of course. But Mr. Henderson, the most important thing isn't the specific details about my tattoo. It's the approach you take when someone's claims seem unusual. What do you mean? I mean that before you assume someone is lying, maybe consider that they might be telling the truth about something you just don't understand yet. My service was classified for good reasons, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Henderson nodded slowly. You're right. I think I've become so focused on catching fraud that I forgot that some veterans have genuinely unusual service records. As Sarah left Henderson's office, she felt a sense of closure that she hadn't expected. The man who had initially accused her of fraud was now committed to helping other veterans in similar situations. Her final stop of the day was back at Patterson's office. When she arrived, she found him on the phone again, apparently dealing with another case similar to hers. Yes, sir, we have the documentation. No, this veteran also has the appropriate markings. I'll send the verification through official channels. When he hung up, he looked at Sarah with a tired but satisfied expression. Another Compass Rose veteran? She asked. Third one this week. Word is getting around that there are people who can help with verification issues. General Morrison wasn't kidding when he said they were going to review all program participants. Patterson pulled out a thick folder and set it on his desk. Sarah, I want to show you something. This folder contains preliminary information about 17 other veterans from various classified programs who are having similar problems with benefit verification. Your case has opened the door for all of them. Sarah flipped through the folder, seeing names and service records that painted a picture of an entire community of veterans whose service couldn't be easily verified through normal channels. Jake, this is incredible. All of these people have been struggling with the same issues I faced? Some for years. There's a former Air Force pilot who worked on aircraft that officially don't exist. A Marine who served with a unit that was never supposed to be deployed where he was deployed. An Army medic who treated casualties from missions that never officially happened. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of the problem. What happens to all of them now? Patterson smiled. Now we have a precedent. Your case has shown that there are procedures for verifying classified service when it's necessary for benefit claims. General Morrison's office is developing standardized protocols for handling these situations. So other veterans won't have to go through what I went through. Not if we do our job right. We're working with the VA to train their investigators on how to recognize and properly handle cases involving classified programs. We're also creating a database of verification contacts for different units and programs. As Sarah prepared to leave, Patterson handed her a business card with her name on it. What's this? Sarah, we'd like you to consider working with us. You've been through this process, you understand both sides of it, and you have credibility with both veterans and investigators. We need people who can help bridge that gap. Sarah looked at the card, considering the offer. Just a few weeks ago, she had been fighting for her own recognition. Now she was being asked to help other veterans in similar situations. Jake, I need some time to think about this. I've been so focused on my own case that I haven't really considered what comes next. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, you've already proven that you're not someone who walks away when fellow veterans need help. I think you know what your answer is going to be. As Sarah drove home that evening, she realized that Patterson was right. She had fought so hard for her own recognition, not just because she deserved it, but because she knew that other veterans deserved the same respect and support. Her ordeal was over, but her mission was just beginning. The compass rose tattoo on her arm had proven her past service. Now it was time to prove her continued commitment to serving those who had served alongside her. 3 months later, Sarah found herself back in a VA office, but this time the circumstances were completely different. She was sitting across from a nervous young man named David Chen, a former Army Special Forces medic who was facing the same accusations of fraud that she had encountered. Mr. Chen, Sarah said gently, I know this is frustrating and scary, but I want you to know that we're going to get through this together. David looked up from the papers spread across the table between them. Ms. Mitchell, they're saying that the unit I served with doesn't exist. They're claiming that my medical records are fabricated. I don't know what to do. Sarah had seen that same look of desperation and confusion in her own mirror just a few months earlier. Since joining Patterson's advocacy organization, she had worked with dozens of veterans in similar situations, and each case reinforced her belief that she had made the right decision. David, let me ask you something. During your time with Special Forces, did you receive any kind of permanent marking or identifier that was unique to your unit? David hesitated for a moment, then rolled up his pant leg to reveal a small tattoo on his calf. It was different from Sarah's compass rose, but she immediately recognized the professional quality and symbolic complexity that marked it as authentic military work. This is a medical caduceus, but with specific modifications that were unique to our unit. We all got them after completing a specialized training program for combat medicine in classified environments. Sarah took photos of the tattoo and made notes about its design elements. Over the past few months, she had become an expert at recognizing the various symbols and markings used by different special operations units. David, this tattoo is going to be key to verifying your service. I'm going to connect you with some people who can confirm its authenticity, just like they did for me. The process that had once seemed impossible was now becoming routine. Sarah had developed relationships with verification contacts throughout the special operations community, and she knew exactly who to call for different types of cases. Within a week, David's case was resolved with full verification of his service and approval of his benefit claims. As Sarah walked him out of the VA office after his final appointment, she felt the same satisfaction she experienced with every successful case. Ms. Mitchell, David said as they reached the parking lot, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. A month ago, I thought my military service meant nothing. Now I have the recognition and benefits I earned. David, you earned those benefits through your service, not through anything I did. I just helped the system recognize what was already true. As David drove away, Sarah's phone rang. It was Patterson calling from the main office. Sarah, we just got a call from the Pentagon. They want to set up a meeting with you and General Morrison. Apparently, there's something big happening with the program verification protocols. Sarah drove to Virginia Beach the next morning, wondering what could be important enough to require another meeting with the general. When she arrived at Patterson's office, she found him waiting with Dr. Walsh and Command Master Chief Rodriguez. Sarah, Patterson said, before the general gets here, we wanted to brief you on what's been happening at the policy level. Dr. Walsh opened a laptop and showed Sarah a presentation slide titled Special Operations Veterans Verification Program. Sarah, your case has resulted in the creation of an entirely new program within the Department of Defense. They're establishing standardized procedures for verifying the service of veterans from classified programs. What does that mean exactly? Command Master Chief Rodriguez answered. It means that no veteran will ever again have to go through what you went through. There will be official channels for verification, trained personnel who understand classified programs, and clear protocols for handling these cases. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and relief. That's incredible. How many veterans will this help? Based on our research, Dr. Walsh said, we estimate that there are over 3,000 veterans from various classified programs who have had difficulty verifying their service for benefit purposes. This new program will address all of their cases. When General Morrison arrived, he brought with him a delegation that included representatives from the VA, the Pentagon, and Congress. Sarah realized that this meeting was about much more than her individual case. Ms. Mitchell, the general said after everyone was seated, your persistence in fighting for your benefits has resulted in the most significant reform of veteran verification procedures in 30 years. One of the congressional representatives, a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Congresswoman Martinez, spoke up. Ms. Mitchell, we're here today to ask for your help in implementing these new procedures. Would you be willing to testify before Congress about your experiences? Sarah was stunned. Congresswoman, I'm honored, but I'm not sure what I could add that you don't already know. Ms. Mitchell, General Morrison said, Congress needs to hear from someone who has lived through this experience. Your testimony could help secure funding for the new verification program and ensure that it gets the resources it needs to be successful. Congresswoman Martinez nodded. Ms. Mitchell, there are members of Congress who don't understand why we need special procedures for verifying classified service. They think the existing system is sufficient. Your story could help them understand the reality that veterans face. Sarah looked around the room at all the people who had helped her and at the representatives who were working to help future veterans. The decision wasn't difficult. I'll do whatever you need me to do. If my testimony can help other veterans, then I'm happy to provide it. The congressional hearing took place 6 weeks later in a packed committee room on Capitol Hill. Sarah had prepared extensively, working with Patterson and the advocacy organization to ensure that her testimony would be clear and compelling. When she was called to the witness table, Sarah felt the same nervous energy she had experienced before dangerous missions during her service. But as she looked out at the committee members in the audience, she saw faces that reminded her why she was there. Chairman Williams, members of the committee, she began. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am a United States Navy veteran. 6 months ago, I was accused of defrauding the Department of Veterans Affairs because they could not verify my service in a classified special operations program. Over the next hour, Sarah told her story in detail, from the initial accusations through the eventual verification of her service. She explained the impact that the accusations had on her mentally and emotionally, and she described the system failures that had created the problem. But most importantly, she talked about the other veterans who were facing similar challenges. Mr. Chairman, I was lucky. I had advocates who knew how to navigate the system, and I had the courage to keep fighting when things looked hopeless. But there are thousands of veterans out there who don't have those advantages. They're being denied benefits they earned through their service, and they're being labeled as fraudsters when they're actually heroes. When Sarah finished her testimony, the committee room was silent for a moment. Then Chairman Williams spoke. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your service, and thank you for your courage in bringing this issue to our attention. I can assure you that this committee will take immediate action to address the problems you've described. As Sarah left the Capitol building that afternoon, she realized that her journey from accused fraud to congressional witness had been about much more than her own benefits. It had been about ensuring that every veteran who had served in classified programs would receive the recognition and support they deserved. The Compass Rose tattoo on her arm had started as a symbol of her service in a secret program. Now it had become a symbol of hope for veterans everywhere who had been forgotten by the very system they had served to protect. 1 year after her congressional testimony, Sarah stood in front of a room full of VA employees at a training facility in Washington, D.C. The audience consisted of investigators, caseworkers, and administrators who would be implementing the new Special Operations Veterans Verification Program. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, looking out at the faces of people who would soon be helping veterans like herself. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm here to tell you about the day I was accused of being a fraud and how that accusation led to the program you're all here to learn about." The training program had been Sarah's idea. She had argued that simply creating new procedures wasn't enough. The people implementing those procedures needed to understand the human impact of getting it wrong. General Morrison had agreed, and Sarah now traveled regularly to train VA personnel across the country. After her presentation, a young investigator named Thomas raised his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, how do we balance the need to prevent actual fraud with the need to support legitimate veterans from classified programs?" It was a question Sarah heard frequently, and she had developed a thoughtful answer over months of giving these presentations. "Thomas, the key is to approach each case with curiosity rather than suspicion. When you encounter claims that seem unusual, instead of assuming fraud, ask yourself what additional information you might need to verify the claims. And remember that just because something is classified doesn't mean it didn't happen." Another hand went up. "What about cases where veterans can't provide any documentation at all?" Sarah smiled. "That's where the new verification network comes in. We now have contacts throughout the special operations community who can help verify service even when traditional documentation isn't available. The important thing is to use all available resources before making a determination." After the training session, Sarah met with the facility director, a retired colonel named Williams, who had been instrumental in developing the new procedures. "Sarah, I have some statistics I think you'll find interesting," Colonel Williams said, pulling out a report. "Since implementing the new verification procedures 6 months ago, we've successfully verified the service of over 800 veterans from classified programs. Of those, fewer than 3% were determined to be fraudulent claims." Sarah was amazed by the numbers. That means that 97% of the people who were being accused of fraud were actually telling the truth. "Exactly. Your case wasn't unusual because you were innocent. It was unusual because someone bothered to verify your innocence. Most veterans in your situation simply gave up when faced with fraud accusations." The statistics reinforced something Sarah had suspected. The problem had been much bigger than anyone had realized. Thousands of veterans had been denied benefits they had legitimately earned simply because the system didn't know how to verify their service. Colonel Williams continued. "Sarah, there's something else I want to discuss with you. The Pentagon is considering expanding this program internationally. There are veterans from allied nations who participated in joint classified operations with U.S. forces, and they're facing similar verification problems in their own countries. What would that involve? It would mean developing international protocols for verifying service in joint operations, and it would probably mean more travel. For you, training foreign military and veteran affairs personnel, Sarah considered the opportunity. Over the past year, she had found deep satisfaction in helping other veterans, but she had also missed the international aspect of her military service. Colonel, I'd be honored to be part of that effort. That evening, Sarah drove to Arlington National Cemetery to visit the grave of her former teammate, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, who had been killed in the same mission where Sarah was wounded. It had become a monthly ritual for her, a way of staying connected to the reason she did this work. As she knelt by Maria's headstone, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that day in Henderson's office when she was first accused of fraud. The terror and humiliation she had felt then seemed like a lifetime ago. "Maria," she said quietly, I hope you would be proud of what we've accomplished. All those veterans who were being turned away, they're getting the help they need now." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Patterson. A new case had come in, a female Air Force veteran who had served with a classified drone program and was being accused of fraud. Sarah smiled as she read the details. 2 years ago, this veteran would have faced months of accusations and uncertainty. Now, with the new verification procedures, her case would likely be resolved within days. As Sarah drove home from the cemetery, she thought about the unexpected path her life had taken. She had enlisted in the Navy, planning to serve her country for a few years and then move on to civilian life. She had never imagined that her most important service would come after her military career ended. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. It was Dr. Walsh calling with news about the International Expansion Program. "Sarah, I just got off a call with officials from the British Ministry of Defense. They want to implement a version of our verification program for their veterans, and they've specifically requested that you be part of the training team." Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with new challenges and opportunities to help people. "When do we start?" "Next month." "Sarah, this program is going to help veterans from 6 different countries. It all started with your case, and now it's becoming a model for how democratic nations support their veterans from classified programs." As Sarah hung up the phone and walked into her house, she passed a mirror in her hallway. She caught sight of the compass rose tattoo on her arm, visible below the short sleeve of her shirt. For so many months, that tattoo had been her only proof of service that others wouldn't accept. Now it had become a symbol of transformation, not just for her own life but for thousands of veterans around the world who had served in secret and in silence. The mark that had once made her feel isolated and unbelieved had become a badge of honor that represented the courage to fight for truth and justice. Sarah had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign battlefields, but in government offices and hearing rooms where the simple act of telling the truth can change everything. Her service in uniform had protected her country's secrets. Her service as an advocate had protected her country's veterans. The compass rose pointed in all directions, but for Sarah, it had always pointed toward one destination: home. Not the geographical home where she lived, but the spiritual home where veterans were honored for their service, believed when they told their stories, and supported when they needed help. Standing in her hallway, looking at her reflection and the symbol that had changed her life, Sarah knew that she had finally found her way home, and more importantly, she had helped thousands of other veterans find their way home too. The general had been right when he leaned in and confirmed that her mark was genuine. But what he probably didn't realize at the time was that her authenticity would spark a revolution in how the nation cared for its most secret warriors. Sarah Mitchell had been accused of fraud, but she had proven to be one of the most genuine heroes in the story of American veterans' advocacy. Her compass had guided her through the darkness of false accusations and into the light of vindication and purpose. Now it would guide her to new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve those who had served alongside her in the shadows of classified operations around the world.